Captain Arya Blackwood crashes on an alien planet overran with lethal predators and must transform from survivor to apex predator to save herself. For 22 years, she converts the brutal environment into a sophisticated predator society and becomes the world's alpha hunter. The stuff of legends whose story will be told throughout the galaxy. NNTHE transport vessel Starforge shattered like a dying comet against the alien atmosphere, its hull wailing as gravitation forces ripped asunder humanity's most brash deep space exploration venture. Captain Arya Blackwood felt her bonds dig into her shoulders as the whirling escape pod pitched through clouds that rippled with electric blue veins, every revolution inching her closer to a world that lay beyond the scope of every survival manual ever penned. NNTHE force knocked consciousness from her mind like a sledgehammer. When consciousness crept back, it came with a taste of blood and the sound of something huge shuffling through vegetation which had no right existing. Her emergency beacon winked back at her from amidst the devastation, its red light the only familiar sensation in the swept desolation, so much that seemed plucked from the worst of dreams. NNTHE tall buildings that surrounded her crash site were difficult to categorize. They appeared to be trees, yet they, a seaf pulsed with inner light, their rough-hewn bark moving like living muscle. Tendrilic branches swayed in patterns that implied intelligence, and the air breathed, a thick soup of phosphorescent spores that burned the throat and made reality shimmer at the edges. The silence was worse than a sound. Not a vacuum, but the burden of squadrons of predators lurking between the shadows of all impossible creatures. Without thought, Arya's 25 years of top military training took over, and the terror that could have objectified her in her tracks was broken. 8 years of commanding deep space recon units and countless hours drilling with worst-case scenario topographs might have prepared her for brutal environments, but nothing the human race had seen could prepare her for what she saw come up on the bioscanner. NNTHE atmospheric readings were barely human comfort levels, but the biosigns made her heart chill. She was surrounded by thousands of beings ranging from those that barely reached the size of her thumb to behemoths that appeared to be walking mountains. The scanner's threat assessment system had short-circuited when it tried to evaluate the data, a screen full of warnings about predator density levels that were the highest ever recorded. NNSHE had arrived on a planet where killing had been perfected by evolution's process. NNTHE first attack happened in her very first night. Arya had been salvaging the pod's contents when the ground beneath her feet shuddered. What she'd thought was fallen wood was the fragmented carapace of something that had sat with geological patience. It surged upward from an explosion of rubble, a living avalanche, maw-lined with rows of crystalline teeth that caught light of stars. NNHER instincts as a fighter saved her life. The plasma carbine ripped from leather and blazed off in one fluid movement, the energy bolts smashing into the creature's hide, and a spray of bioluminescent fluid hissed against the ground like acid. The death cry of the beast sounded through the woods, a noise like tearing steel, and from the deeper wilderness came answering caws. NNSHE had signaled to an entire ecosystem of top predators that she had arrived. NNTHE next 4 days were a haze run, shot hemorrhaging. The monsters charged in continuous waves, each weird and deadly in its own special way. The mirror stalkers worked in coordinated packs, the shine of their fur bending the light around them until they were living specters. The air was filled with the growl of the razor hornets, flying nightmares whose needle-tipped stingers could penetrate military-grade armor. The flowing death was liquid shadow, slipping through spaces smaller than a coin to attack from impossible angles. Each one provided her yet another lesson in this world's ordering of violence. These creatures didn't feed just for sustenance. They fed for dominance, for territory, for the heady, untrammeled excitement of the kill. They were masterpieces of evolution, and she was their latest prey. NNBUT Arya had been formed in humanity's most elite military academies, her mind honed from years of battle against human adversaries who fought with wits and strategy. These otherworldly predators, superpowered as they might be, adhered to behavioral code that she could translate. The mirror stalkers attacked by surprise, a strategy that made them susceptible to enfilading. Basak claimed that the razor hornets attacked along spirals that could be anticipated and defended against. If she was familiar with their territorial demands, the flowing death might be lured into traps. and knowledge became her primary weapon. For every wound they caused, there was another in the endless vista of their abilities. For every impossible escape, and instruction in the vast expanse of their frailties. She started changing to suit the very animals that were trying to murder her. NNTHE change had come on day 5 when she had met her first apex predator. A beast not that much bigger than a grizzly on Earth, but evolved by its own form of evolution into a killing machine. Its skin was living armor, its talons monomolecular blades, and its mind blazed from eyes that followed her every movement with calculating precision. It was 4 hours before he stopped moving, and 23 more scars on her narrow back, and a cooling heap of a corpse at her feet. But as she gazed down at the vanquished apex predator, something deeply changed in her relationship with this world. The other beasts were not running from the smell of blood, they were running from her. NNSHE had slain their alpha predator and taken its place in the food chain. It smacked into her as if it were a force of nature. This was a world of dog-eat-dog, in which the entire food chain was pitted against its neighbors in permanent arms races of evolution. She had proven herself to be a real top-of-the-pyramid predator by outliving what surely should have killed her. NNTHE transformation in her occurred slowly, like wear remolding stone. She started to pick up on details that human perception missed. The way the growth of certain fungi indicated where to find veins of underground water, which bioluminescent organisms could be harvested for effective camouflage. What creature calls indicated hunting parties, and which territorial squabbles. NHER gear began to fail, one part at a time. The plasma carbine went dead on ammunition. Alien spores clogged the filtration systems in her environmental suit. Her emergency stores were corrupted by local bacteria that made her violently ill. Everything that made her human was being ripped away, leaving her to either adapt or die. NNSHE chose evolution. NNTHE. First time she ate the meat of something that she had killed with makeshift weapons. She was prepared for revulsion. Instead, it was as if she could feel raw power coursing through her veins, like liquid steel. The alien proteins were toxic to the human body, but her system was adjusting, teaching itself to digest food that had never been found on Earth. She was turning into something else, something that was of this world. NNHER eyesight, her hearing, her other senses all became superhuman. She could smell the fear pheromones of prey from kilometers distant, could read in the most innocent little clicks and grunts, the acoustic signature of the shifting of windblown trees in the canopy 3 stories overhead. Her reflexes had become superhuman, her physical strength unparalleled. Her cells were being changed by the world and she was going along with it, sun unknown. She was there long enough that the local ecosystem started accepting her as a member of the family. She learned to decipher the territorial signs that the different species left for each other, to recognize the intricate web of alliances and enmities that held sway over the politics of this world. What she found out was that these animals were not simply mindless murderers. They had complex social hierarchies, codes of honor, and even rules of warfare. NNTHE mirror stalkers could never bring themselves to attack a creature who had bested their pack alpha in single combat. Pheromone communication. The razor hornets could be reasoned with via pheromonal communication. The flowing death acted as a hive mind, and when one took respect, the whole race offered the tiniest amount of patience. NNSHE wasn't just surviving anymore, she was assimilating. An NTHE catalyst for her rapid change was her encounter with the Deep Hunters, being so old and so powerful that they were the stuff of legend among other predators. These things didn't forage for food or territory. They hunted because they enjoyed the sheer artistry of killing, and they sought out the most formidable, the most challenging prey against which they could match their evolved abilities. One of the specimens, which she had codenamed the Voidbringer, had followed her for weeks. It had an infinite amount of patience, beyond human understanding, watching her habits, discovering her weaknesses, waiting for the perfect time to attack. When it eventually showed itself, she saw why other predators spoke of it in awed whispers. Beautiful in the way that a perfect weapon is beautiful, where every line of its anatomy was honed for killing, every gesture violence turned into poetry. It would be her final challenge, her evolutionary crucible, and she knew one of them would not be standing at its conclusion. It spanned 4 biomes, from the crystal caverns beneath the forest floor to the acid storm where only the most dangerous predators lived. They clashed with their own bodies and with makeshift weapons, with predatory instincts and evolutionary adaptations, both pushing each other beyond what they thought possible. When the fighting was over, she was the only one standing in a pit of desolation, her body colored with the phosphorescent blood of the grandest predator the world had ever known. That is when she knew what she was now. NNSHE was no longer human. She was something new, a mixing of human smarts and alien instinct, of earthly tenacity and otherworldly capacity. She was the top predator of a world that had never had such a thing. NNTHE ecosystem responded to her rise. Other predators started looking for her, not as enemies, but as subjects to the acknowledged superior. She was the alpha hunter, the apex predator of an interplanetary feeding tube. NNBUT, with great power came great responsibility. The gentle equilibrium that had kept the ecological balance of this world in check for millions of years now depended on her. She could go on to rule by fear and brutality, or she could find another, better way. NNSHE elected to be a teacher. NNHER first pupil was a juvenile mirror stalker that had been exiled from its pack. A young one who'd been exiled after a hunting spat wrecked its refracting talents. Hearts would have destroyed in the old world view. She would have removed it without looking twice. The weak did not belong in the world's structure. But here, now, she saw opportunity where others had seen liability. NNSHE trained the immature predator to rely on other senses to hunt, to make up for its tattered camouflage by improving its sense of hearing and smell. She taught it how to capitalize on environmental advantages, how to recognize subtle clues that prey was nearby. And she worked with the stalker until it was one of the deadliest hunters in the forest. Its infirmity turned to its advantage in combat, and word got out about her teaching through the ecosystem like wildfire. Animals that were exiled from the herd came to her to be taught by the alpha hunter. She brought them all in, the outcasts a chance to build up the predator population of the world. She had invented wholly new hunting tactics that grafted human tactics onto alien reflexes. She designed training programs that took creatures far beyond their evolutionary adaptations, nudging them to develop capabilities that would have been beyond natural reach for millennia. She set these rules up for the apex predators and lesser species to follow, just so the ecological balance wasn't skewed. NNBUT, her most brilliant idea was the invention of the Hunt Assembly's forums for predators of all kinds to swap intelligence, compete in controlled environments, and make alliances that crossed unnatural lines. NNTHE initial Hunt Assembly had fewer than 30 beings attend. In 2 years, hundreds of species were there, their age-old antagonisms set aside in favor of the common good. She'd brought the predator population of an entire world into a single-minded philosophy and built a civilization around the concept of the honorable hunt. Years went by, and the legend only grew stronger. She was hailed as the primal matriarch, the one who had stilled the whirlwind, who had shown that strength and wisdom need not be enemies. The species of the planet were evolving at all too rapidly a pace, born the right way due to the wisdom of her teachings. NNBUT, she never let go of her human roots. During the dark still time when alien moons let their ghostly glow filter through the trees, she felt the ghost of Earth. She would remember her lost crew members' faces, the sound of human voices, the taste of food grown from soil touched by the Earth's sun. NSHE erected a cairn at her first crash site, a small utilitarian building made with local materials, but styled after Earth's architectural traditions. It was a reminder of where she came from, of the price she had paid for her change. NNTHE Memorial received pilgrims from around the globe. Predators would come from miles around to visit the alpha hunter's roots, to understand the origins of her strange wisdom. There were many that would leave something behind, trophies of their finest kills, reminders of their species' greatest accomplishments, simple trinkets of regard. NNBUT. The most significant visitors were the young ones, a new generation of predators brought into her altered world. They had never known the old ways, the sickening repetition of waste and violence that defined this world before she had come to it. To her, she is not just the alpha hunter. She is the creator of her race. NSHE would instruct them in the meaning of balance, in the difference between hunting to live and hunting for leisure, in the obligations and having power. She would tell stories about Earth, of a place where predators had evolved to live with their prey, where intelligence had transcended raw instinct. And occasionally, when the lesson was over and the young hunters had all gone back to the places where they came from, she would stare at the stars and wonder whether any of them pointed the way back. NTHE answer came in her 22nd year upon the world, when the sensors she thought she had destroyed for good began broadcasting a message that sent her heart racing. Another human ship was incoming, lured in by the automated distress beacon that had been emanating from their crash site for over 20 years. An NSHE stood at the edge of the forest, watching the lights of the ship grow brighter in the alien sky, and she felt at war within her heart. A part of her wanted to run towards them, to take back her human self and go back home to the stars. Another part of her, however, the part forged in the crucible of this world's grace and savagery, knew she could never really return. This was not the woman who had fallen into this world. She was something new, something that lived in the gap between human and alien, between civilization and wilderness. She was the link between two lines of evolution, and the work which she began was unfinished. NNHER Pod's crash site of 22 years ago would also serve as the clearing where the ship had landed. The search party that did emerge had state-of-the-art military technology, and its powered armor shone in the phosphon accent light of the forest. They strutted with the confidence of humans who never had been true prey, never had to evolve or die, and NSHE watched them from concealment, watched the way they jumped at every sound, the way their weapons would sweep toward threats that didn't exist. They were babies, green far beyond their years, totally unready for the lessons of this world. When she finally came out, their responses were more than she could have hoped for. An abomination, a human being who had sinned so grievously that she was hardly a member of their species. Her flesh was covered with the ceremonial scarring of dozens of predator cultures. Her eyes sparkled like the bioluminescence of animals she had honed to hunt. She moved like an alien, a predator, anything but human. And she spoke to them in their own language, spinning tales of Earth known only to one who'd lived there. She made them believe that behind that bestial appearance, something human still lived. And Captain James Morrison, the 26-year-old officer in charge of the crew that rescued Brown, was the first to look past her deformed face and treat her like the woman that she was. He listened to her stories, asked her about the world she adopted, the new life she had taken to convert her soul. "You could come back home with us," he said on their final call. "Our medical specialists think they can undo a lot of those biological changes. You could see Earth again." NNSHE grinned, an expression so foreign on a face that had mutated under 22 years of evolutionary stress. "This is my home now, James. These creatures are my family. I cannot abandon them." "Then what is it you want with us?" NSHE glanced toward the forest, where thousands of gleaming eyes were fixed on her from the depths of the woods. Her students, her children, the empire she had made of nothing save for violence and will. "I need you to broadcast something to Earth about this place. Not to conquer or exploit it as we want, but as a place where something new is coming into existence, something that might change how we view evolution and survival, and what it means to be human." NNSHE gave him one with 22 years of observations, genetic analysis, and some cultural studies. "This world has teachers, if only humanity is ready to learn, but they have not taken kindly to would-be conquerors." NNTHE rescue party did not leave until the next morning, their vessel rising to the foreign heavens like a silver star. She watched until it disappeared, then turned to the forest and her real family. NNTHE decades that followed would be her most prolific. Knowing Earth had the news of her survival, she was free to continue to push her experiments. She started to work with the smartest predators to build new ways of communicating, new ways of structuring society, new ways of solving the age-old problems of coordinating resources and apportioning territory. NNHER idea of establishing the first interspecies council, a government spanning all the largest predator groups on Earth. She founded the Great Hunt, an annual festival that celebrated the greatest hunters and stressed the rules of honor which upheld the society. She even started to tinker with domestication, showing flexible predators to tend the life forms they relied on, rather than kill them to the last individual. And in BUT, when she was at her greatest, when she successfully spawned the first generation of crossbred critters, new life forms that melded features from more than one species, and that were stronger, more intelligent, more adaptive than anything natural selection had cobbled together. That was in her declining years. These hybrid hunters were now the keepers of. They were her kids in all but the official sense, and they would carry on her teachings into a future she would never see. When her end did come, she met it with the same bravery she had shown on her maiden hunt. She was old by this world's view of things, her body finally beginning to yield to the stresses of decades at the top of the food chain. But she had lived long enough to see her dream come true, to see a world of brutal individualists turn into something that nearly qualified as a civilization. She'd killed the way she'd lived. Among the monsters she'd trained to hunt, to think, to want something other than to just survive. Her physical form was laid to rest in the crystal caves that cut through the forest, to rest in a tomb etched by the collective hands of 100 different species working in perfect unison. But her legacy was the world itself. A marvel transformed by 22 years of guidance, from a world of chaos to one of wonder, where the savage did not merely exist, but invented art, where intelligence triumphed over instinct, where the strongest protected the weakest, where the only thing that made sense was the unimaginable sacrifice she had made. And NTHE half-breed hunters she had produced would be the historians for the new world, passing the legend of the alpha hunter down to future generations. They whispered of the girl who fell from the stars, who learned to hunt with the best of them, who taught an entire planet the meaning of evolution was not survival, but rendering of yourself what you had been to become what you could be. And on clear nights, as the alien moons brought their ghostly light into the dappled dark of the forest underbrush, the creatures of that world would gaze up to the stars and recall the lesson she had taught them, that the mightiest predator sometimes isn't the one with the most power, but the one who knew when to express compassion. Winder's Korsgavel along. It was a message from a generations later descendant of the crew who had found her, a new group of humans who had analyzed her data and learned from her example. They came not as invaders, but learners, ready to discover the civilization she had built. They carried gifts, art and music, Earth stories, but also questions, curiosity, a sincere willingness to find out what humanity might be when it embraced its predatory nature instead of denying it. NNTHE, mix-matched hunters, greeted them with the same warmth their progenitor had afforded to the lost and the forsaken. They gave him their learning, their methods, their philosophy of honorable hunting. They presented the humans with a vision of what their species might become, once it stopped pretending to be something that it was not. And in the crystalline caverns below the rainforest, where the alpha hunter had died, the walls began to shimmer with strange bioluminescence. It was a signal that the ecosystem had assimilated this new arrival, that the world she had invented was prepared to move on to its next stage of being. NNTHO's humans who stayed on the planet, and many did, became the second generation of hybrid hunters, their DNA vector altered by the same steady force as their forebearer. They combined the two, the human's tactical mind and the beast's animalistic savagery. They are constructing new settlements in the canopy, not with the aim of detaching themselves from the ecosystem, but of attaching themselves to it. They never made tools that made their innate capabilities obsolete. They made art that glorified the beauty of the hunt, literature that delved into the philosophy of survival, music that caught the beat of the food chain.
But above all, they remembered the woman who had made it all possible. They related her tale to their children, shared her techniques with every new generation, and paid her the respect of joining her in skirting the line between human and predator. The world she had made would keep changing, guided by the principles she had established but not bound by them. New species appeared, new hunting practices was perfected, new types of cooperation and competition were instituted. The civilization she had built ebbed and flowed, but its core remained the same, a love for the sport and the wisdom of knowing when the sport was everything. And among the great dance of stars and planets, other worlds started to have visitors formed in her image, learned from her example. People like those who had faced their predatory spirits, those with the understanding that evolution wasn't a place you arrived, it was a place you journeyed, the understanding that the greatest hunts were not for sustenance or dominion, but for the chance to be better than you were. The story of the Alpha Hunter ranged throughout the galaxy with those who had nothing but the story to learn from her. They discovered new worlds with new challenges, new ecosystems that required new configurations of themselves, new chances to pit themselves against the universe's grandest predators. But no matter how much they traveled, how much they were altered, they held in the core of their beings the simple truth she had learned herself in those early, terrifying days after her crash, that survival was not enough, and that evolution was not an accident, and that the most fearsome predators were not even people who killed indiscriminately, who killed in droves and with abandon, because the most terrifying ones were the ones who could unravel completely, and in their wake would leave nothing but something better than they had found. Her name was said in 1,000 languages on 1,000,000 worlds, and was always the same: the Alpha Hunter, the one who had revealed to an entire galaxy that the line between civilization and barbarism was not an emptiness to be crossed, but a land to be settled. And in the end, that was her finest victory. Not that she had lived a long life, but that she had proven that evolution was not a matter of chance, but of choice. Not something to be endured, but to be pursued. Not a ladder to be climbed, but a path to be chosen. Not a quest for truth and beauty, but a journey into the unknown, into the unbearable lightness of being, the inescapable darkness of the certainty of becoming. Not a journey to heave, but to heaven.